think we can go ahead and get started, and then as the 5th grade Brightwood class is able to join, hopefully we can welcome them in. I'm really happy to see you all and welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm joined today by Alan Spears, Director of Cultural Resources for National Parks Conservation Association. And this is our first in a continuing series throughout the summer, looking at green careers. So talking with environmental professionals from the DC region to learn more about the many different ways that jobs and professionals can connect with the environment, to learn more about it, to care for it, and to build our own understanding and relationship with natural spaces. I welcome you all throughout the session. Please feel free to submit questions into the chat or through the question and answer feature, and Caroline will be helping collect those questions and voice them to us, since we won't be able to see the chat during this broadcast, but we would love to hear your questions and help get those answered. So yes, thank you all for joining us. And at this point, I'd love to introduce Alan. And Alan, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Sure. Well, Jeff, thank you. And thanks, everybody. I'm Alan Spears. I'm a DC native. I actually grew up about 1.5 miles where we are today at Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens, and have always thought this landscape is pretty spectacular. The National Parks Conservation Association, which is the organization that I work for, was established in 1919 by the first director of the National Park Service, who understood it way back then. The National Parks and Public Lands were going to need citizen watchdog group, advocates who can help protect the parks from all the nefarious schemes that people have to make sure well funded, well managed, well protected, and well loved and well engaged by the public. So that's the work we've been doing for a little more than 100 years now. And I just celebrated my 24th anniversary at PCA just last week. So I've nested. It's a great organization. One of the things that I find about doing cultural resources as they relate to national parks is that if people ever stop to think about national parks, they think about the large landscapes, Yellowstone, the Everglades, Yosemite, or local, maybe like Shenandoah. But 2/3 of our national parks are historic and cultural, so smaller sites. Places like the Frederick Douglass home just down the road, or the Merrimack Team Council home over in Northwest Washington, D.C. And these are equal parts in our national park system, right up there with the big, large natural landscapes. And even those large landscape parks are chock full of historic and cultural resources. So literally 100% of our parks are historic and cultural resource management business, which is really neat for somebody like me who has a passion for this.
Yes, it's an amazing resource, and great to know about all the different ways we can connect with these parks. I noticed today that we are not in an office. We're not in an office setting. So can you tell us a little bit about where are we today and what's your connection to this place?
Well, actually, real quick, so before you begin, I think the wind might be getting in the way a little bit. So would it be possible to get closer to the mic a little or adjust the volume?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Thanks, Caroline.
We are at Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens, nestled on the banks of the Anacostia River in Northeast Washington, D.C. And this is a park that promotes aquatic plants, Asian lotus and lily plants in particular. But we've got 2 different landscapes here, a human constructed one, ponds on the interior, and then a natural landscape, which is the marshland that abuts the Anacostia River. So it's an amazing confluence of a bunch of different natural resources, but there are also some great historic and cultural resources down in this park as well. I got started maybe about 17 years ago managing a friends group for NPCA, a community partners group meant to better connect this park to its neighbors. And that grew into an independent 501c3 friends group that had the primary responsibility for managing the park's managing the park's volunteer service count. And so you can't quite see them behind us, but the ponds that are in the park need a great deal of tending. And our colleagues in the National Park Service didn't always have sufficient staff to get in there and do that work. So we were able to bring in volunteers from all across the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area, and sometimes even farther beyond that, to assist with volunteer service projects to keep the park in shape. And I helped to manage that for about 17 years, and it was wonderful to be connected to a work that I love.
Thanks for sharing that, Alan. It sounds like in your work that people are really important to the connection to parks and understanding the cultural and historical significance of the parks. Can you talk a little bit about maybe someone from your early days in this work or in your career as you were getting started that had an impact on you or helped shape the way that you think about this work today?
Sure, like role models and mentors, and people who helped shape my thinking about natural resources and history. My parents really did that. My father was a scoutmaster for a troop called 580 here in Washington, D.C. And although I never joined that troop, I got the benefits of all of his knowledge about what it meant to be in the outdoors and how you should handle yourself. And we did these short excursions. Remember, this is Washington, D.C. back in the 1970s when there was still more forested land. And we would take hikes through the woods, as we called them. I didn't realize at that point that many of the woods at Fort DuPont and East Capitol were actually Park Service managed territory. But he would point out things and show me the secrets of being able to maneuver through the woods in a way that was quiet and unobtrusive. And I really liked that. And my mother was a librarian at the Library of Congress. And she rewarded me whenever I would buy a book instead of something superfluous with my allowance that I had as a kid, overly generous allowance. And I would read U.S. history. And that was one of the ways that I got connected to the history of this country, and then found out, almost by accident, that that history is contained and managed and interpreted by the National Park Service. So both my parents were big role models and influences.
Yeah, that's great to have people who can help shape that understanding, that connection, especially within family too. I've got a couple more questions before I turn it over to anyone else who's joining. Thinking about, so we're broadcasting to students today, and were there any classes or activities that you were involved in through school or extracurricular as you were growing up that led you into this career that you think might be a path for anyone else who's interested in those same activities or hobbies to follow in your footsteps?
Well, I went to school at a place called Georgetown Day over in Northwest Washington, D.C. And that provided a number of opportunities for students to get connected to historic and cultural resources, natural resources. We did volunteer service events and a wide variety of activities that got us interested in the outdoors. And what I remember most is that actually in my junior year, I think it was in high school, we established a Civil War club. So all of the nerds, about 7 of us in the high school at that point in time, established this club, and we would go to places like Harper's Ferry and Gettysburg and Antietam and tour the sites, buy the books, learn about that history, and then come back and debate about what the generals had done and what the privates had done. But I think that kind of connection to the land, when you're able to walk a battlefield, that actually makes the history that you've been reading come alive. So there is no substitute really for getting out and about and walking the grounds and seeing where American history happened. You know, we made a commitment more than 100 years ago that we were going to protect and preserve our national parks, that we weren't going to pave everything over. There were some things that were so important that we would withdraw them from future development in order to maintain them for the benefit, enjoyment, and inspiration of the American public and people worldwide. And so national parks are really fantastic places. The history, the culture, the natural resources, the recreational and scenic resources that are maintained there. They're great places to learn about the civics of this nation. They're great outdoor classrooms. A place here like Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens, you can come and learn a little bit how nature works and about your interaction and interface with nature. I think our parks are really interesting. And I think that commitment is something that the National Parks Conservation Association and me are interested in maintaining for generations to come.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. For anyone else who's interested in joining a career path that connects them with national parks or public lands, or being a steward of cultural resources of these places, what's some advice that you would have for a 5th grader or a 3rd grader or a student who's interested in those areas?
I think the first advice that I would have is that when we start to talk about careers, maybe sometimes the eyes of young people glaze over because it just seems to be something that's so far off in the future. So let's start with this. National parks are a lot of fun. Being out in a place like Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens, you can have a great time. You can have an adventure. Going to a place like Gettysburg National Military Park, where you get to walk the ground where the history actually happened, it can be a great deal of fun. So let's start with that. It can be fun. And then I think if you have an interest in pursuing a career in conservation or preservation, historic resources, natural resources, what you can do is actually find local parks. And if you're here in the Washington, D.C. area, there are a bunch. Most of them have some kind of volunteer service activities that take place. Not all of them have you outdoors in the mud, picking up garbage or planting plants, which I think is a great deal of fun. But you might also find that there's the ability to work with an archivist or a historian, researching or archiving papers and historic documents and resources, if those kinds of programs are being offered. And so there are a variety of ways. You can kind of pick and choose when and where you enter sometimes. But I think the volunteer service component is really a critical path or avenue for young folks to become involved. And the other thing is just visit these places with your family. Many of the parks in this area do not have admission fees, and if they do, they're on the small side. But you can go to the C&O Canal. You can go to Harper's Ferry. You can spend time with your family. You can learn a little bit about the history and culture, the things that have challenged us as a nation, and the things that have also brought us together as people. And you can have fun, you can learn, and then maybe you can ask your uniformed ranger guide that you will see while you're on site, how can I be better connected to these resources? How can I be better connected to the National Park Service? I'm betting they're going to have a couple different answers.
Absolutely. Those volunteer opportunities sound like a great way to get connected to both Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens or other parks. And we'll make sure we put links to resources of how you can get involved with volunteer opportunities on the Green Careers website on Nature Forward and through the related activities to this broadcast today. So at this point, I want to open it up to anyone else who's joining us. If there are any questions you have that you want to ask to Alan, feel free to write them into the chat or the Q&A, and Caroline will help deliver those to us so we can speak to those as well. And Caroline, if there are any that have come in already, you can let us know. All right, maybe while people are entering questions too, I'll keep asking, because I've got lots I would love to learn more about Alan, his work with National Parks Conservation Association. But Alan, what's something that you're working on that you're looking forward to right now? What's something that's coming up within your work that you're excited about? Makes you excited about the work you're doing?
Oh, well, forthcoming, we are actually working with our National Park Service colleagues on the designation of a new site that will commemorate the life and legacy of Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley, his mom. Emmett was a young African-American boy who ran into a great deal of difficulty when he went south to visit relatives in Mississippi. His mother then took the rest of her life to pursue justice for her son, who was murdered in 1955, and became a real hero, trying to make sure that civil rights and human rights for all people were enacted and observed in this country. And I think she and her son deserve a place in the national park system, so we're working towards that right now. I think one of the great interesting things about the work that we do at NPCA is we have the opportunity not just to work with parks that have already been established and to make sure they're protected and preserved, but to see how we can capably and judiciously help to expand that national park system so that the Park Service is really telling and protecting and interpreting the stories of all of us. Because all of our communities, all of our families, all of us as individuals really have a story to tell about the development of this country, roles that we have played, or in the instance of some of our students who might be with us today, roles that you will be playing at some point in time. So we want to make sure that we've got a system in place that can appreciate, understand, and interpret all the various people who have input to help make the country what it is today.
Thank you for that work, and I'm excited for that arc and that recognition, that story, to be something that we can all learn more about through that work. All right. Do you have any other questions? I don't want to hog all the question space here.
Yeah, it seems like the chat box is disabled, but there are some questions coming in through the Q&A. First question being, what's the favorite part of your job?
Ooh, what's the favorite part of my job? Well, getting to be out in places like this with great folks like Jeff and meeting you all. This landscape isn't just a place where I did volunteer service. I am connected to Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens in some fundamentally deep ways, by which I mean I got pulled out of the marsh by a park police helicopter back in 2001, working a volunteer service event. The tide was down, and I went out to get these tires that had been stuck in the tidal marsh probably for a decade. I got stuck, had to get pulled out by a helicopter. The tires are probably still in there, but it was a lesson learned for me. But my connection to this landscape is, I really would do almost anything, did almost anything to protect and preserve this landscape. And it did kind of sort of take care of it. After a while, it was covered with mud. I stopped sinking. The sun came out and began to realize that there are people who go to spas and pay good money for this kind of treatment. I'm getting it for free, and I'm safe. But to anybody who will volunteer here or volunteer with me, please do as I say, do not do as I do. But being out in the landscape, walking the fields at Gettysburg or Yorktown Final Victory, going into the Frederick Douglass home just down the road from here in Anacostia, Cedar Hill, and being able to see the weights that Frederick Douglass used to help keep himself in shape, to see some of the books that he had, some of the furniture that he had, and knowing that Frederick Douglass was, for his time in the 1800s, 1845 up until the time of his death in 1895, he was one of the most famous, if not the most famous African American on the planet. But we can go see his house. We can see his growlery, where he went out the back of the house, sat, and was not to be disturbed while he penned essays and thoughts and editorials, opposing slavery, supporting the use of military force to end the insurrection that was the American Civil War, doing all these things, all these important things, but his house is still there, it's still standing. You can see those artifacts. And so that's a favorite part of my job, is actually being in these sites, walking these fields, being in these landscapes.
Wow, that's incredible to be able to connect with the stories, connect with the history of these places, and stand in these spaces as we learn more.
Right, another question from the Q&A. What animals are there in the park?
Here at Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens, there is a wide variety. So you can probably hear the bird song that's going on in the background. There are American fish crows that are here, more what I'm going to describe as, insult intended, more basic birds like orioles and other things like that. My favorite animal that's here actually, though, is the black rat snake. And these are these incredible, when they're in the adult stage, they can be about 6 feet long. They're shiny black on top. They're white on the bottom. And one of the most interesting things about black rat snakes is, as the name implies, they go after rats and other things like that. But if you actually see one on the boardwalk or out in the daytime, it'll sense that it's being observed by a human and it'll freeze. So this is not a challenge like when screens freeze in Zoom calls like this, but what it actually means is that the snake is using its secret power. Because when it freezes up like that, the idea is that you don't see it, it's not actually there. It is not an invitation for you to go over and pick it up and ask it how it's doing and then try to put it in your pocket and take it back home. That's a no-no. The only things you should ever take from a national park are garbage, memories, and photographs. But I love the way that they're very handsome creatures. They serve a very noble purpose in the environment and in the ecosystem. And if you ever get to see one, just observe it from afar. They're gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous creatures.
Great question. Yeah, thank you to the attendee who asked that. Yeah, I hope you have a chance to come here and look for all of those animals and all that wildlife someday too.
In the chat, I'm seeing that there are a few questions from the classroom. Are you able to unmute and share with Alan and Jeff what your questions are?
I don't know if people will be able to unmute, so we might just have to use the question and answer feature.
I think we're able to unmute. Can you hear us?
Oh, great.
We can hear you. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Caleb. You're going to say your name and then ask your question.
Hi, my name is Caleb. And
hey, Caleb.
What inspired you to take care of nature?
Good question.
What inspired me to take care of nature? That's a good question. I think, Caleb, certainly you can see the need for people to pay attention to what's going on in natural spaces. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes students like yourself and people like me always get the sense that nature is something that's happening miles and miles away from where you are, but it's actually right in front of your house, right in the back of your apartment. And so looking for opportunities to come to a place like this, it felt like it was the right thing to do. I would tell you that one of the things that makes me most angry in life is litter. And when I see garbage on the side of the street, it upsets me. But when I see garbage in a place like Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens, it makes me really angry, because I think that's just not right. And so anything that I could do, especially in my capacity as someone helping to organize volunteers, get the plastic and the garbage and the sports equipment out of the tidal marshland here, I was going to get that done. It's always been important. Thank you for your question.
Does anyone else have a question they're ready to ask Alan? I don't think we can hear you yet. So if you're asking it, you might be muted still.
Does look like a pretty neat classroom, I say.
You might be muted because we can't hear your audio right now.
We're not ready yet.
There we go.
Okay, that's better. Could you ask your question again?
My name is Adonias, and I'm in 5th grade. And my question is, I have 2 questions. My first question is, are the animals in your garden friendly?
Yeah, they are friendly. There are no people-eating animals that are here, but they're friendly in their own way. So in the same way that if you were walking down the street in your neighborhood, you wouldn't just want to go up to a stranger and hug them necessarily. And it's the same thing here in the park. You want to allow the animals, the beavers and the turtles that are here, the birds, snakes, and all the other critters, you want to allow them their space. So you observe from a distance, marvel at their beauty and their wonder, learn a little bit about who they are and what they do, and then go on your ways. Second question.
My last question is, what was challenging?
What's most challenging maybe about this work? I think what's most challenging is that sometimes there's just not enough hours in the day to do all the work that you want to do on behalf of a place like this. And especially when it comes to somebody like me, that's a historian by training and by passion, I like to read a lot. And sometimes there's just not enough time in the day to read all the books and articles and look at all the online articles and read everything that I'd like to read. So that's a big challenge.
These are great questions. Let's keep them coming.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, what's the easiest part of your job?
What's the easiest part of my job? The easiest part of my job is talking about my job. I really think that we've got a really great mission and a great vision for the organization that I work for. I get to be in places like this on days like this. And again, as a historian, I get to visit places like the Frederick Douglass home or the Grand Canyon or a place called Fort Davis in West Texas, which is where all 4 units of Buffalo soldiers of Black regular troops are stationed. And I get to see and research, talk to people who know about all this history. So that's amazing. That's the best part. Second only, second only would be chatting like this.
We might have time for one more question, because I know you all have to get on to the next part of your day as well.
Oh, we got a little gecko down there too. I think we got another person. Yeah.
So, one of my question. Oh, hi, my name is Christian. And one of my question is, what is one part of your job that is hard?
That's fun.
No, that's hard.
Oh, that's hard. That's hard.
Maybe get that question again from you, Christian.
Nice and loud. Everyone in the back, you gotta be silent.
What part of your job is hard?
So I have to do a fair amount of work with elected leadership. And so sometimes working with people who have, the parks that we protect, the resources that we protect are sometimes dependent upon getting the right funding and the right policies. And sometimes we have sharp disagreements, severe disagreements with the people who are controlling the money and the policy. So that can be a little bit challenging. That can be a little bit difficult, but we've also seen that parks are places where people can come together, not just at a place like Kenilworth to have a good time, but also to come together about policy and about decisions that we want to make to keep these places protected and special. And so that is, it's a challenge, but it's a challenge that can be overcome. And when you're able to work together with people who have differences of opinion, that's a really special thing. I imagine you might not get along with everybody in your class all the time, but ultimately as a class and as friends, you can find ways to work together to get a good result on something that you want to do. So that's a challenge, but it's also a good thing in terms of the work that we do. And I hope that answered your question at least a little bit.
Thank you so much for all your answers. We have to jump off to go to our next class, but we appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Take care
Thanks
now.
for joining us. And thank you everyone who joined us today. And thank you, Alan, for being here and sharing about the work you're doing.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
We hope you all will continue to tune in to more of our Green Careers discussions throughout the rest of the school year and throughout this summer.